Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. Super excited to go kick off our training and upskilling theme. We've got Hans here, who you will meet in a minute. If you guys are watching live, don't worry, Vlad will also be here in a minute. He's just running shortly late. We'll get to go see where in the airport lounge he has found to go have this awesome conversation as we get to go have with Hans in just a minute. If you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you guys are new here, the majority of you are probably watching us on our LinkedIn platform. Then the rest of the majority of you are probably watching on YouTube. If you guys have questions or comments, we love to have fun conversations. So please go ahead, drop questions, comments in the chat. If you are watching now and you want to drop in the chat hi, please go ahead and say hi. Now, most of the time that the chat comes through, every once in a while the chat doesn't come through, and we'll have to go back into the platforms in order to reach out. But if you guys have questions or comments, we'll do our very best to go ahead and bring them into the show as we continue to have this conversation. But without further ado, everyone officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub. This is episode 193, and we want to welcome Hans on. Hans, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Dave, thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor. I'm super excited to do this.
Awesome. Fantastic. Now, Vlad is getting ready to go on, come on, but I get to go ask this question, Hans. I feel like it's a question I never get to ask while Vlad is here. We've had a bunch of fun conversations. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about you, kind of the work that you do? I think it's super interesting, and I'm very excited to get into this. So can you tell us a little bit more about your background and the work that you do, please?
I see Vlad is just turning up as well.
Absolutely. That high quality camera that Vlad has got.
Yeah, the against the light shots, those are always the best one, right?
It's the quietest spot I could find. Sorry.
No, it's great. Yeah. Great to see you, Vlad. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Hans Schrynemakers. I was born and raised in Belgium. So that's where I'm from originally. And for over, I think, roughly 23 years, I've been developing, standardizing, testing, commissioning, and troubleshooting Siemens and Rockwell software applications. And I've been doing that for industry-leading companies in the food and beverage industry, like Nestlé, Hershey's, Pepsi, Kellogg's, and Pringles. So all quite big names where I've been installing machines. If we take it from the beginning, 1996 is where I started my engineering studies in Belgium. So somehow between the partying, I managed to graduate in 2000 as an automation engineer. And actually, in the final year of my university is where my life took quite a big turn. And the reason is we took like some kind of study class to Spain, to Madrid. And I met a Danish girl over there, which is my ex-girlfriend. It's an ex-girlfriend of mine, but she was a Danish girl. And I didn't know back then that that's actually going to be the beginning of my PLC programming journey. So after this trip, I planned to move to Denmark because of this Danish girl. So I moved to Denmark eventually, and I found my first job as an automation engineer. And that was for a company that was supplying pasteurizers for the bottles, for bottles and cans to production facilities all over the world. So it was a global company. And this is where I started working first with Siemens PLC programming. There was Semantic Manager back in the days. There was no TIA portal back in 2001. So I was working mostly with Semantic Manager. And what I was doing back then as well, I was starting doing a lot of commissioning work. So I was traveling quite a lot, seeing a lot of the world, and that made actually huge leaps in my PLC skills as well, this traveling and this working on actual machines. There's one interesting story that I can remember from working in that company, and that was I once had a trip to Bucharest in Romania. I think I was working at a Pepsi factory, and one Sunday afternoon I had the day off. I had to work Monday to Saturday, but Sundays we had the day off. So I was walking in the local park next to my hotel, and during my walk, a couple of wild dogs, they came up to me and they started to be very aggressive and barking. And I was, of course, a bit afraid. So I was looking for a way out. And luckily there was a street close by, and I managed to cross that busy street, and the dogs didn't follow me. But it's one of these memories from working abroad that has stayed with me, and I've made many memories like that. Then the second big step in my life and in my evolution as a PLC programmer came in 2005, where I changed jobs. So I started working in 2005 for a supplier of chocolate and bakery equipment, was as well an industry-leading company. Again, there was a lot of traveling involved. I was traveling all over the world, from US to Russia to Thailand, many places in Europe as well. And with this company, I started to doing Rockwell programming. So next to my Siemens, I was now doing Rockwell and Siemens. And then I think around 2010, I think that's when TIA Portal got introduced. Then I started actually my TIA Portal journey. And, to be honest, in the beginning, I wasn't really a fan of TIA Portal. To be honest, I was very cross with TIA Portal to start with. I really couldn't see the big deal. I was a Somatic Manager and some Ocean guy, hardcore. That was what I was used to work with. So going over to the first versions of TIA Portal, and I don't know if anyone remembers that, but TIA Portal was a little bit buggy to start with. I wasn't convinced, but then somewhere, I think around version 13 or 14, I started to use it more and more. And then all of a sudden I had this click inside of me where I could actually see the huge improvements compared to the classic step 7 programming. And since then, I basically haven't looked back anymore. Now I'm all pro TIA Portal, and I can only see the downsides of going back to Somatic Manager. Every time I still get a project once in a while, and I'm always like shaking my head like about the things missing, the things I expect to be there, which aren't there. Then in 2013, I took another big leap in my journey, and that's that I decided that I wanted to become my own boss. So I basically quit my job. I told my manager that I'm going to be a freelancer. So I was starting to doing freelance work as a PLC programmer. And to make things even more interesting and maybe a little bit more complicated, I met my future wife, Vesta. I met her in Denmark. So I was a freelancer in Denmark for 3 months, and then she got a job offer in Austria. So I just started the company. I just got my tax advisor in place. All the steps you need to be doing to become a freelancer in a country that wasn't my own, because I'm Belgian. So it was already in a second language to put, even though they speak very good English, the Danish. 3 months a freelancer, then moved to Germany. Have to start a freelancing company again, and in German, which I knew a little bit of German, but I can't say I was fluent in German. So I had to do all those steps again in a different country with new people. But so I moved to Austria. And I started the company. And the way I first started to get clients was by going to trade fairs. I went to the Hannover Messe. I was just talking with Dave before the podcast about that. So I went to the Hannover Messe. I went to the Interpack Messe, which is another big one. And I started making connections. I did a little bit of homework before I went. I wrote down which companies I wanted to meet. And through that, I've actually, I made some clients, some of which I still work with to this day. So I've been working for some clients that I found on those trade fairs for 10 years. And then basically the final step, and this is where I am at the moment, that happened in 2020. So my freelancing business was doing good, that was stable. And then I was thinking of ways to actually get my skills over to other people, how I can get other people, how to learn them about my structured approach to programming. And at the same time, I was looking for ways to earn a little bit of passive income on the side. So that's how I started creating TIA Portal courses. I created my first PLC and HMI course, built my website, created a lead magnet, did marketing automation, sales funnels around those courses. And basically, I've been growing that business from 2020 to 2024, with last year being my best year yet. And that's where I am at the moment. That's my journey so far. So I hope that gives you kind of an overview of where I came from and how I've got to where I am today. And yeah,
Hans, a lot of different, I guess, questions for you. First of all, I guess apologize for the lighting. I think this is the best. You sometimes do
no
it from the
problem.
airport, but you know how this job can be. It's a lot of travel, a lot of different sites. But let me ask you, on the business side, right? You've mentioned that, and I know that I guess this question will be relevant because we have a lot of audience members, whether they're currently working for an end user or a machine builder, they're looking to either maybe do contract work or maybe go off on their own. So I'm curious if you would recommend the same technique that you've mentioned, which is going to trade fairs and maybe networking more in person today, right? Because I think things have certainly changed, especially since COVID, where there's a lot more digital presence. I think it's maybe easier to reach some of those companies online. So what would you maybe suggest for someone looking to build those initial clients today versus what you had done? And maybe it's
What
the same
I had
strategy.
done. Yeah, I still think the personal touch is something that's going to stay even after COVID. So I think sometimes seeing people face to face gives a different connection than just talking with someone over a Zoom call, a Google Meet. So I would probably still take the same steps. I'm actually planning this year to go to the Hanover Messe again to kind of freshen up the technologies, the new everything that's with AI that's coming. I haven't been there in way too long, so I'm definitely planning on going this year. And as well, because you see the machines, you see the people see you, you get to talk face to face. I still think there's a lot of value in that. So I would recommend that if you're starting out and you want to meet new clients, try to go to trade fairs where people in your line of work are going to be representing, are going to be exhibiting their machines or their services.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely appreciate that. It's so I know that Dave has been there a couple of times now, and he certainly told me about it quite a bit. I have not had the opportunity to go yet, but I know for us, at least on the US side, right, and most of my customers are US or Canada based, I think Automate is sort of the biggest trade show, but I would assume that Hanover compares maybe not in size, but certainly in vendor presence. So it's certainly something I'm planning to go to. But yeah, it's something we've been discussing together with Dave, and if the opportunity is there, we'll definitely be there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I was going to continue the conversation, Vlad, but
Yes.
if you've got a question, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think for me, Hans, right, I think it's very clear that there's definitely different players across the different markets in the world, right? And I think you're very well positioned to maybe have the conversation as to maybe why you think that is. And ultimately, I think it's also more interesting than just saying, one platform dominates like in the US or one platform dominates in Europe, right? Like which factors are there, right? Is it because integrators are using this more? Is it machine builders? Is it the fact that colleges are maybe utilizing those in their programs? So I'm curious maybe to get your perspective why we're seeing such a, I want to say, significant difference in what's used in North America versus
Yeah. So I mean, I would say Europe. I mean, Siemens is probably Siemens dominates the PLC landscape in Europe, but there's as well a couple of other brands which are being used. And I think the reason that Siemens is so dominating because they are European country headquartered in Germany, and they have a long history in industrial automation. So they've been building this over a long period of time. So it's very difficult as another company to just come in and take over that position. They've built trust with the companies that they work with, and they have a strong presence in sectors like manufacturing, automotive, and process industries. You have other companies as well, like Beckhoff, who are quite strong in Europe. They do more PC-based control system. Again, they're German. They have as well some interesting technologies like EtherCAT. Bosch Rexroth is another one, which is well known for hydraulic and motion systems. And for example, companies like Schneider, a French company that's used a lot in France, B&R, Austrian company, I think as well, they do a lot of motion. ABB, they do robots as well. This is, I think, a Swiss or Swedish or both.
Mhm.
So they have just been there for such a long time, and like Germany is the industrial center of Europe. So the companies that are being built in Europe, in Germany, are used a lot in the other European countries, for Germany being such a strong industry. Rockwell, on the other hand, is not so popular in Europe compared to how dominant it is in North America. But sometimes they use Rockwell as well. I think, for example, if you're a multinational company, and you have a base as well in Europe, I can just think of a company like Coca-Cola or Nestlé or something like that. If you have a global footprint, if you have companies everywhere, then you will still use the equipment that company has decided on. So, for example, Coca-Cola, being an American company, will use, I can't say for sure, but let's say they use Rockwell, then they will use Rockwell as well in their European factories.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, it's I guess I'll share like my experience with P&G was that we had a sister plant. Well, the main plant was in the U.S. There's multiple divisions, but our sister plant in Budapest was on Rockwell as well, right? So they obviously had a harder time finding people that knew Rockwell out of school and had to have a bit more training
Yeah.
on that side. And same, with distributors, right? There's obviously fewer people that can source those components. But I think for me, maybe the interesting and more difficult question for you on that side would be, I've personally in my career have not seen where a facility goes through a complete overhaul, right? So they're going from either Rockwell to Siemens, Siemens to Rockwell, or any other brand for that matter. But I think the interesting question is, what do you think it would take? Or I guess, like, have you seen those in the first place? And what do you think it would take? Because ultimately, we as integrators sometimes get frustrated by some of the small
Mhm.
things, but in the grand scheme of things, for the vice presidents or the C-suites for some of these manufacturing companies, they don't, I would say, not necessarily, they don't care that much about the little details, right? They don't see the TIA portal or the RS
No.
logics. As long as the plant runs, they're happy with the solution. So I'm curious if you've seen big overhauls like that, and maybe what do you think hypothetically, if you haven't, it would take to go from one platform to the other?
Come from one platform to another. Well, the choice of platform is typically as well predetermined by the machine builder itself. So I've seen factories where if you have a turnkey line with different components, front to back, downstream, upstream, and everything, then some machines might be from some hardware supplier, Siemens. Another one may be Beckhoff. Sometimes the factory or the end customer just has to, I said, it just has to take the cards they're dealt with. And sometimes a machine builder does not offer the flexibility, but they do have the better machine, and then the end customer will take that machine, even though it's not the same standard as they have on other machines. So I have not seen factories as such or end users make a change, but I have seen changes inside the machine builders themselves. So, for example, I worked with a client who was working with Simotion a lot for the motion, and just out of frustration and just having enough with the lack of support, they decided to go all in on technology CPUs from TIA Portal. So I've seen that more on the machine builder side. I've worked as well with a machine builder who had Siemens and Rockwell, but they started out with Rockwell, took Siemens on afterwards, but because they had such a struggle to keep both of those software standards, because they had very intricate software applications with a lot of synchronized motion and everything, so quite complex applications. Because it was difficult to maintain those standards, they decided to scrap the Siemens part from their portfolio. So they went back to what they originally were used to, and they said, from now on, we just make sure we keep those Rockwell standards high. We don't have enough knowledge or manpower to have two good standards for two different type of vendors.
No, absolutely. I think that's really interesting, Hans. And I want to go dig into the standards conversation a bit more. But before I do this, I want to go take the opportunity and ask you from the European perspective, right? So very infrequently do we have a European who has spent significant amount of time learning the Rockwell platform and also learning the Siemens platform. I mean, I think very infrequently do we have someone that rises close to expert level on either platform, much less both platforms. So I would love to hear from your perspective as a European, maybe some of the positives and negatives of both platforms, and maybe where you see groups going into the future, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So I came from the Siemens world, which for most people, the transition from Siemens to Rockwell is an easy one. The transition on the other side from Rockwell to Siemens is a more steep climb. And I know that because I had a lot of colleagues that worked with me in the same company. And some of them came from Rockwell and they had to learn Siemens, and they were all shaking their heads. So they were just like, oh, Rockwell does it like this. Rockwell, why doesn't Siemens? So they were mostly complaining about why doesn't Siemens do it like that? But we were still talking semantic managers, so the old classic step 7. This was pre-TIA portal. On the other hand, the people who came from Siemens and went to Rockwell, they say, oh, this is easy. This is very intuitive. So in the beginning, so when I started with Rockwell, it was very clear that Rockwell's package was much more intuitive, and the entry level was much lower. So especially if you we did a lot of motion in that company, especially the motion in Rockwell was very easy to get started with. In Siemens, you had SimMotion as the alternative for motion for the motion applications, and SimMotion was just like a beast of a software package with really like millions of possibilities. But that meant you need to know millions of things. There were like a parameter list with 10,000 parameters, but you have to put parameter 5006 and 2309 to 5. And you just needed to know that. With Rockwell, you didn't have that. The whole motion thing was more like a black box. Whatever happened inside, you just have to send the enable blocks, the move blocks. That was all very straightforward. But that all changed quite a bit with TIA portal, because TIA portal, I think, took a lot from what Rockwell did good, and it improved upon it. So now I still love working with Rockwell. It's still very intuitive, but I think that Siemens has made huge steps forward, where Rockwell has kind of stagnated on that. And the thing that where I always thought that Rockwell lacked is in the HMI in the HMI field. So the factory talk compared to the WinCC, that's for me still uncomparable. Siemens really beats Rockwell by miles when it comes to the HMI application. I must say I don't have experience with all the different types of factory talk, but as far as I remember, you have to do all the tagging manually. None of your tags are directly connected to your PLC tags. That was one of the big things in Siemens. If you change something in your PLC, the tag gets automatically changed in your HMI. That's one of the things that when I was working with factory talk, I haven't worked with it with the newer versions, but back then that was not possible. But I think both platforms have their pros and cons. I love working with both. I still think the motion, the accessibility of motion is probably still easier on Rockwell. But everything else, the way you can build structures in your software, modularity of software, I think both platforms have the same. They have different ways of doing it, slightly different ways of doing it, but they both have their strengths and their weaknesses. I mean, I love working with both at the moment. So I don't mind where the project come from.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I guess, Hans, I want to ask before we let Vlad jump back in, what are you seeing now? What is the customer demand now? Is it mostly Siemens? Is it mostly Rockwell? Is it some of the other brands? Where does that currently, where's the work and opportunities that you're seeing and talking about coming from?
Yeah. Personally, I'm doing more Siemens work at the moment. I can just speak from my own experiences. But I think it still depends on the company you're working for. If you're working for an international company, like I work for a couple of international companies, everything they ship to the States is Rockwell. Everything they ship to, well, most of the stuff they ship to Europe is Siemens. So it really demands on where they've sold the machines. Which type of company. If you have a company that purely produces for Europe, it's going to be 90% Siemens, most likely. But if they have a big American market, then they're going to produce more Rockwell. So it's really the location and if that company is international and has local factories, maybe. Yeah, exactly.
Vlad, did you want to jump in? Did you have any thoughts on Factory Talk View SE or ME, or want to go ask Hans any other specific questions about that?
Yeah, I guess to start off with maybe a comment. I think I certainly see the point. I've not experienced as much WinCC applications, as I probably should have to fully appreciate the software. For me, Factory Talk View is fairly simple and intuitive, but I would say that there's definitely other players that have, I think, made it easier, right? So I've always, I guess, again, because I was brought up on the Rockwell side, had almost assumed, hey, you have a separate application for your PLC software, you have a separate application for
Yeah.
your HMI software, and I'm, I guess, comfortable to deal with those quirks. But I think once you see what's possible elsewhere, you realize how much easier or better it could be. But again, my customers, and this better than anybody else, they're simply locked into one vendor or the other for good reasons, and we'll get into standardization probably in a couple of minutes. But ultimately, I think there's something to be said about simple integration between the same system, right? Whether we want it or not. And of course, us as integrators, I'd prefer being able to, take, let's say, a Allen Bradley PLC, being able to easily send data to like a Siemens HMI, vice versa, and mix and match, however, whichever line I prefer. But I think ultimately the reality in the current state of automation, and correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe you have different thoughts, is that it's always easier to be on a single platform, right? There's less kind of weird quirks, and again, it's possible to send data across, but it's not as straightforward, I would say.
No, you're absolutely right. Huh? It's always more easy as well from the spare parts point of view. If you just have one platform, yeah, that would be the ideal situation. Yeah. 100%.
So let me ask you this, right? Like on the standardization side, you made this comment a little bit earlier as well, where in many factories, or I guess in certain industries and factories, you could see a hodgepodge of different platforms, right? You go walk the line, and some of it is Rockwell, some of it is Siemens, some of it is Beckhoff, Wago, PLC Next, you name it, right? And so
yeah.
I've certainly been to those environments, and for me, my experience is that they usually run, and again, this is a generalization, but they run worse than a company that can standardize and, to some degree, maybe force the machine builders to comply to the standards. And thus far, you have less of a learning curve, right? And I think you've mentioned this, but you can certainly learn the other platform, whether that's the easier path from Siemens to Rockwell or the harder path from Rockwell to Siemens. I think you can learn, but ultimately, if you have 5-7 different platforms, there's still this constant struggle as the engineer supporting that facility, where even I sometimes forget some of the challenges on Rockwell, and I would Google the the question. I'd find some answers on PLC Next, on the PLC chat. And so, like, my point is, what are your thoughts on maybe standardizing and trying to maybe even to some extent be almost platform agnostic, but at the same time making it easier for the end user to work with some of these systems?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think again, the standardization with the companies that I work with, it doesn't really happen on the end user level, but it happens in the machine builder level. So they keep the standards high. You might have an end customer that asks for some certain aspects to be implemented in the PLC. They want some kind of, they say, for example, which type of communication they used. I had customers that said, we just use ISO and TCP communication, or we just use TCP communication. So that might be a standard, but the overall standard of the software that's controlling your line, your packaging machine, your process, that typically comes from the machine builder. And you talked as well, Vlad, a bit about the engineer supporting the software. In my experience, it's very rare that the factory or the end user itself has people that actually have to go into the software themselves. At least in Europe, it's not so common that people at your factory would go into the software. Actually, most of the time it's not really recommended, because then you get a phone call in the middle of the night. The customer says, hey, this isn't working. And by the way, we made lots of changes last month ourselves. So for that reason, I think most of the companies I work with, they typically like that if anything goes wrong with the line, to call their technical department or their service department, and that they, for example, remotely go into the PLC, check out the problem. If it's not possible, then there's a flight the next day for a person to go and look at it if it's really hindering production or something like that. But it's very rare, I think, in my line of work, that I meet factories where they actually have software people that go into the software applications of the machines that they buy. They might have a look at it, but they would always ask you for advice when they say, hey, we just want to put an extra screen with some information. Is that okay? Or that's typically.
That's very interesting. Like, I would say, sorry to interrupt your thought. My experience has almost been, I don't want to say completely the opposite, right? But I've worked for very large end users. And so when we would go and I think I probably told you the story. I went to Italy, I went to Japan to test equipment before, signing off on it and bringing it to the US. And we would typically treat the machine builder as, they would run it with their software, they would do the validation on the process side, and then we would erase all the PLC programs and put in our own programs that we would, have had commissioned in the past. So to me, it was almost
really?
like, you guys can do your tests, like show us how the machine runs, but then we would not put the trust in there. And again, obviously there's different machine builders and different levels of quality, right? But you could see how a lot of their code was just to like dry run the machine and make sure that yes, like you can show the customer what's working, but they didn't have all the fault codes, all the necessary items that we needed. But it's I would say maybe it depends on the factory size and the teams that are there for the end users as well. And I've seen, depending on the industry, I've seen machines like you're describing, but I've certainly not.
You would say it's more more times than not you would reprogram it with your own software.
Well, I think it's the companies I worked for, right? Because they're fairly large manufacturers.
It might be not country specific, but it might be company specific. It's hard to say. I've seen it with a couple companies that when you come, you expect. It was a company last year. I expected to see a certain standard from the machine builder I was working for. That standard was gone. Instead of that was a very different code. Let's just put it like that. So it was difficult to get into it. That's the other thing. If the machine builder has a standard, sends it to the end customer completely changed the code, and then says, hey, can you come and do some support? You come, look at the code, and it's all new to you. And then it's very difficult because you're used to a certain standard, but the customer has changed it so much that you kind of have to rediscover the software, the modules, the programming.
I think it certainly voids the warranty, right? Like that's the I guess you're alluding to when you start making changes, and rightfully so, right? Because if you build a machine to certain specifications with certain code, if you start making changes and that's the reason why the machine goes down, it becomes very difficult to kind of figure out who's going to eat the cost, right? Because ultimately,
who's responsible?
That's right. So it's like I guess I've seen, like I said, I've seen both, but companies that have dedicated teams like in-house would usually, and it depends, right? Like it's not always white or black, but a lot of times they would be responsible at the end of the day on how things run, and they would be given the right tools to make the changes, right? Whether
Okay.
they're going to make a few things, right? It could be simple changes. It could be like interlocks, right? So if you have a line, then you obviously, and sometimes the machine builder would provide those signals, but a lot of times you need to figure out, well, if this machine stops, then it needs to send the signal to whatever's
Okay.
feeding it to stop. You know what I mean? So it could be
Okay.
basic modifications, and sometimes it could be major things that they would add like
Yeah.
afterwards. But
Okay. No, yeah, I'm used to adding those things myself, so that the end customer says, we are putting this external machine, third-party device on the line. We need some communication going. Here is the data we want to have communicated. Can you please integrate it from your side on your machine, and we'll do it from our side. That's the typical way that I'm used to doing those kind of communication to third parties, to downstream, upstream, or yeah.
Absolutely. I guess let me just add a bit of context. We've got a bunch of listeners. We have about 3 dozen folks listening to us live at the moment. So I imagine that there are lots of new names and faces that I don't normally see in here. And just for a bit of context, most of the large companies that Vlad was working for, that he was talking to, were certainly in like the Fortune 50, Fortune 100 style. So very large. They have very good internal standards. And if we're going to spend money with you, and it might be 100 of our sites that are going to spend money with you, you are going to build it to however we want it. It almost doesn't matter how much it's going to cost, sort of things. I've experienced that a couple of times with smaller companies, but very infrequently do they have the standards of this is the PLC and this is the code structure and this is the standards that we have. You have to write everything to how we're doing it, or maybe I'll just send my own programmer over and they will go program it how we want it to so that we can go support it. So that is what I would think is of as best practices, but isn't as frequent of happenings as some of us would want. Hans, we've got a couple of questions in the chat that I want to ask you, but before that, I want to ask, talking about the standards. So you were saying that some of the machine builders that you work for have internal standards that get sent over to end users, and if they aren't changed, that is kind of how everything is programmed. But some of them will change a little bit of it, will change a lot of it, may have their own completely different set of internal standards of how to program. How much are you seeing companies saying, yes, we'll just accept whatever you're having, versus, oh, we have our complete own set of internal standards. This is how everything needs to be written. Kind of like what percentages or how often are you experiencing things get completely changed from the typical of the machine builder?
Almost never. Almost never. It will always be like small changes. They, for example, say we need to have some data up to our MES system. We need some OPC UA data or something like that, and then you would have to just create a new database, fill that with data for the customer. But I cannot remember the last time that the customer asked for, this is the standard that you need to implement. They will always just accept this. I mean, I work mainly with machine builders, so I just take the standards that the machine builders are using. In the couple cases where I work directly with an end customer, they have just told me to do it to the best of your knowledge. Just program the way that you think makes best sense, like in the way that you think the program will be the most efficient. And those are, of course, the programs, the programming that I love to do the most. When you get total freedom, that's for me the ideal case, where you can just let your creativity go wild. That you're not bound to certain standards, because I have the advantage that I work with different clients compared to working just in one company all the time. So I see different standards, and I see good things and bad things from each standard, and I just like to take all the best bits and just put that in my head and create my ideal way of programming out of those different software packages, standards that I see.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of questions in the comments that I want to make sure we get for you, Hans. Davey is asking, have you been asked to look into MTP, module type package? Is that something that you have come across beyond just maybe theory and trade magazines?
Nope.
Okay.
I have not been asked to look into that. No.
As I said in the chat for everyone else listening, it's something Vlad and I have had maybe 3 conversations about, but it is a very European German concept of basically lots of interchangeability. It gets much more technical and specific than that, but basically I could take an Allen Bradley. Yes, we did, Vlad. At least 3 conversations in the past we've had about MTP. But like, can I take an Allen Bradley piece and replace it with a Siemens or an ABB? And everything is set up so that it's much easier replacing between everything else. And then we've got a question from Chuck from earlier asking if you've worked with safety instrument PLC systems or like safety PLCs. I know you do a lot of motion, Hans. Do you do safety PLCs?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah. That's
Okay.
part of so everything that's PLC related. I've not worked with DCS systems. I've not worked. Yeah, I work PLCs, motion safety PLCs. So that's exactly.
Let me ask you a follow-up.
I have lots of.
Yeah, I was going to ask you maybe like a follow-up on that question, Hans. And I know that I get this question a little bit also on Solus PLC is how do you get trained on safety systems, right? Because I've been in instances where, I was surprised a little bit or taken aback by the fact that the people implementing some of the light curtains for some of the projects would tell me, I have 0 training on safety. I just kind of wing it with this controller and I hope that things are going to run, and then I'm sure you've heard this too. You get asked, hey, can you implement a bypass for the system? And be like, well, I don't think that is an option. So maybe what would you advise engineers who are maybe looking to do some work on safety systems or maybe asked to start looking into some trainings? What is available today?
Yeah, for safety system. I mean, the first thing I'd like to say is safety system programming is very easy compared to motion, and it's typically just like AND instructions with an energize at the end. It's if this and this condition is good. It's not very difficult logic, but it just needs to be safe. And most of that comes actually from the machine builders. So they will actually determine how that machine is considered to be safe. So me as a PLC programmer, I never had to worry about that, because whenever the customer wants to do anything about the safety, I always have to feed it back to the main company and say, are they allowed to do that? They have a safety engineer specifically for that to evaluate if that's still safe, if people cannot get hurt, if mechanics cannot get hurt. So I am not the number one. I just do the implementation. So I'm not the one who takes the decision about. That's maybe the first important point, that the safety aspect itself I think should be evaluated by someone with safety training, and that's not, doesn't need to be the PLC programmer. It can be, but the companies I work with, they have separate safety people for that. And then as far as the safety programming goes, I mean, I just learned it by doing it. Basically, there was a standard developed from the companies I worked with, and like I said, it's quite simple logic, and to be honest, most of the automation vendors like a Rockwell or a Siemens, they make it very difficult to actually do something wrong, because the safety programmer has much more checks than the standard software. So typically you cannot, when it comes to, for example, double inputs or two channel e-stubs, it will not run if you actually do something wrong in the logic, much more than in the standard logic. So I have of course you could bypass a door, for example. You could still make it dangerous for people. You can do that. You can disable all the e-stops if you wanted to, but that's more like a deliberate thing you would do.
Right.
So in my feeling, it's quite simple logic, and the software packages really help you not to make any mistakes creating the logic.
Gotcha.
That's a little bit my experience. Yeah, I did not take any courses or classes to do safety logic. It started small with some e-stops, with some door switches, then some STO signals for frequency drives for motion.
Hmm.
But it's all small steps and one project after the other, and basically, yeah, get your hands dirty a little bit. Work with projects that have safety with some smaller machines first, and take small steps from there.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. The other question I wanted to ask, and I think this was brought up a little bit in the chat, right? And so I think over the years we've seen this sort of evolution, I want to say, of soft PLCs or software-based PLCs that can live in a computer. And to be honest with you, I've heard this for many, many years, right? But you've been in the industry a bit longer than myself. So I'm curious, maybe, are you seeing something tangibly beneficial in industrial automation that will sort of help this, or I guess even accelerate the migration, if I want to ask it like that? Or do you think a lot of it is just sort of noise, and we'll still keep the current hardware as it is in place, and maybe just evolve the hardware versus replace it with servers that run virtual PLCs? And I think every vendor at this point has released some flavor,
Mhm.
or at least is trying to like roll out maybe test pilots of like virtual PLCs that can run on
Yeah,
any like Linux box essentially. So I'm curious to what your thoughts
yeah.
are on that side.
Yeah, I mean, to be totally honest, I have very little experience with those virtual PLCs at the moment. The companies I still work with, I mean, the companies I work with, they still work with hardware PLCs. I did work with a company 10 years ago, and they were running a Siemens soft PLC on a server. Yeah, they were doing that, but it was something to do. They did very difficult calculations as well in a C++ environment, I think, which were not possible in a PLC just because there was so many calculations per second. So they put everything in like a desktop, like a server, and I think it had to do with speed issues and stuff like that, communication. But I have not seen a trend of people moving to virtual PLCs yet. No, not in the industries that I worked with. No.
Are you seeing people looking at or moving at all towards the industrial PCs? I know you said not virtual PLCs, but are you seeing more industrial
IPCs.
IPCs? Yes.
I've seen that more for data collection. So I've worked on a couple projects myself where data from the machine was sent to a SQL database in an IPC, where line recipes were centrally stored in an IPC. So in that context of just having your data in one place, which is as well easy to back up and restore in case you have system crashes, I've seen it being used like that. Yeah, more like as a centralized memory place, kind of to have all your recipes together, all your kind of big data, process information, how your plant is operated, to have that all in one place. Yeah, but not to have a PLC running in it. No, not like that.
Interesting. We have someone, Khalil, in the comments saying that they use IPCs in Algeria. I love the concept of them personally. I just haven't found a lot of great opportunities. And I am maybe of the opinion of I really feel much more happy and confident running just a hardware PLC on the side of the line, as opposed to going and moving that somewhere else. But it will be interesting to see where technology continues to push us. Davey is in the comments asking about, have you been looking into or using any of the Siemens Somatic AX?
No, I have no experience with AX. No.
It's very new. So Davey, I don't have the episode number off the top of my head, but in 2023, Vlad and I were at SPS in Germany, in Nuremberg, and we talked to some of the Siemens AX people while we were there. I know it's changed a little bit. It's interesting to see kind of where the AX, which in my general understanding, and the Germans I'm sure will correct me because I'm sure I'll be wrong, is kind of the next generation of technologies and the next generation of where they can go push and move a lot of things things. I think there's an AX marketplace, as there are a couple of other marketplaces. I cannot for the life of me 100% understand where one starts and the other stops, but I am sure that is more of a me issue than an explanation someone has completed somewhere issue. I am sure that it exists somewhere when it comes to that. Absolutely. And then let me ask one more question before we continue. Hans, Amin is saying we've had a couple of questions about different languages, graphical languages like ladder and function block versus text language like structural text or possibly C++, Python, comments like that. We also had Davey ask kind of the difference in what you're seeing between Rockwell on that side versus Siemens. You and I have had a bit of a conversation about kind of your thoughts when it comes to the different languages. Can you share that with everyone on your thought, maybe what you use or prefer to use, or what you're seeing if there's specific customer demand?
I mean, I think the best language for you is the language that you're used to. That's typically the one that you have the most experience with. Me personally, the companies I work with are working with ladder logic most of the time, with maybe some statement list for parameters. But there's always seemed to be this discussion going on LinkedIn and other platforms on which language is the best, which I don't think is the most important conversation there should be. What I've really seen a lack of in my experience with working together with different PLC programmers is that PLC programmers lack the ability to structure the logic. So in my own opinion, I think there should be much more focus on structuring your application than on which language your block is programmed in. You can program a block in any language. I mean, I personally think probably the text-based languages are going to be more on the forefront in the future, mainly because of AI that is not able to write ladder logic because it can write. It's like ChatGPT. It writes text, and it's mainly been like it's being developed for writing text-based language. So that's why I think it's going to go more towards those type of languages. In my own opinion, but I think this is because I'm used to. I still think ladder logic is easier to troubleshoot, but that could just be me being used to using ladder logic. And you hear all the time as well that technicians they have an easier time troubleshooting ladder logic because you have the green lines. It's more graphical, so it's easier to get started with. But I mean, I don't have a preference of languages. Like I said, I think you should focus as a programmer more on how I'm going to break up this application into modules. How I'm going to make my application easy to troubleshoot, easy to maintain, easy to update. And all of that has little to do with the language. The language is kind of the structure inside your block, which you can see as a small block of code, like an encapsulation of code. But how you make those blocks talk with each other, how you make the whole software modular so you can easily take modules out, move modules around, copy modules. I think that's where the real strength lies and where you can step up your game in PLC programming.
Yeah, I've heard that argument many times as well, Hans, right? Which is that the technicians or whomever is supporting the PLC is able to only read ladder logic. And I've even, I think, like made a post on LinkedIn stating that I really hate that comment, right? Because it's almost like you've intentionally not trained them on the right tools, because
Could be, yeah.
it's just as easy, to be honest with you. Like the IDEs, like you've said this at the beginning, have evolved quite a bit. So in Rockwell, I know for a fact you can very easily troubleshoot structured text, and you can see like line by line where the issues are. And so if you know how to do it, right, if somebody obviously explained it to you and shows you, then it's just as easy as troubleshooting ladder logic.
It's just a training. I agree with you. It's just a training, and I think just it's more like the history of being used to ladder logic, especially probably Rockwell has as well more a history of being ladder oriented. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's at least my feeling. It's It's a little bit the same with Siemens. I think it has as well a bit more the history, being ladder logic, where the text-based languages, they came more in the foreground in the last maybe 5 to 10 years.
No, and I think, look, it makes sense, right? Because it's ultimately electrical diagrams. That's where ladder logic came to
that's
be.
where
But
it comes from.
but I think it's one of the arguments, right? Like the other comment I've heard many times, and part of the reasons why, like, I had to rewrite some of the code was the use of AOIs and UDTs, right? Again, it's like technicians will not understand AOIs and UDTs, sure, but if you take a moment to, sit them down and, hey, like, we'll explain to you how they work, it really isn't that complicated. It simply is, just a function or a data type in any other languages, and I don't think you need a PhD in controls to be able to troubleshoot an AOI or UDT. But anyhow, that's just the nature, I think, of our business. I think that there's certainly sometimes an expectation of learning over the shoulder of someone versus maybe getting some more formal training, whether that's through third parties or through the OEMs or through the software providers, which is what I guess I want to lead our conversation to. Is you've ultimately decided to build, I want to say, or branch out into training as you were doing systems integration. So I wanted to ask you, maybe first of all, like, why training, right? Because you could have built a hardware solution, you could have built a software solution, you could have built a maybe an IT widget or what have you, but you've decided to provide training to technicians, engineers, and whomever. So maybe I wanted you to unpack a little bit the thoughts at that point in time. What have you learned maybe from providing the trainings, and kind of what it has evolved into today as well?
I mean, the way I came to my courses is, and it's gonna sound funny, but I think I Googled 10 ways of creating passive income. That's how we got started. So I was looking at ways to kind of build some extra income streams. Like I do some real estate investing as well. But I was just thinking, I was in that period of time where I was reading books about having multiple income streams. If one income stream fails, you have another one. And then I was reading and I was going through the list. I think one of them was building an app, which I did as well. I built an app for children for playing around with pictures and stuff like that, which got downloaded 4,000 times or something, but I earned $0 on it. So then I thought, okay, that was kind of out of my league. That was not, it was not my field. Let's just put it was not something I didn't know anything about. That app was produced by a team in Croatia, so I had no control over the content or over the outcome that much. I was in a different playing field. And then I was reading about these these online courses, and I thought, that's quite interesting, because I've been working in this industry for quite a long time. And I was looking a little bit around. I think I started looking on Udemy, what was there. I saw there were some courses, some Rockwell courses there, but I saw there was not so many TIA portal offers. So then I thought, okay, that seems to be like a hole in the market. And I started first with my PLC course. So I looked up how to do the recording, what to use, what for lighting and stuff. Produced the PLC course, got it out. And then I thought, okay, the HMI course is the logical evolution. I did those two courses. And that's basically how it got started. So, and when I think about it afterwards, it was the right step, because you're kind of trying to teach people what you already know, or the steps that you took to get where you are. And I think that's the best kind of thing that you can give to people, like the things that you have learned, and maybe people can reach it faster, because they don't need to make all the same mistakes that you made. They can kind of see how you did things and how you do your programming, and hopefully get there a little bit faster. Yeah,
Absolutely. I love that, Hans. I feel like, as I've told you, that is not all that dissimilar to how Vlad started building Solus PLC in those original courses. Although you weren't in a Holiday Inn Express, which I feel it kind of adds to
exactly.
to the story in the background of Vlad.
You started in a Holiday Express, Vlad. Yeah?
Hey, you know how it is. Small business, you gotta hustle. You
Yeah.
need to make things happen. And when you're doing again integration work, a lot of times you're on the road, right? So for me, early on,
That was
to be honest with you, I didn't even think of it as being a business. I just wanted to create content because,
yeah.
quite frankly, there wasn't a whole lot of it, and I thought I could
Mhm.
explain things, in a different way or maybe
Yeah.
better. And so I would travel a lot of times to different locations to work on customer projects, and I would, again, as Dave pointed
Yeah.
out of Holiday Inn Express, be recording some videos. I would travel through, the border with my controller and have it on the desk, and it was good. It was interesting.
That's awesome.
It's an
Yeah.
interesting period.
It's
Yeah.
yeah.
It's honestly one of my favorite stories of the early courses. And every time I go back and see the early videos that Vlad made, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
yes, I imagine the wallpaper is still exactly the same now, 8 years later, or whatever it is. But no, that's awesome. So, shameless plug on the Solus PLC side, guys. If you are interested in learning more on the Rockwell side, on the Siemens side, and beyond, there are PLC Next. There are other courses on there as well. Check out solusplc.com either for individual subscriptions, or if your company or organization is looking to learn more, please go ahead, drop us a message. Someone will get back and help you with that. And if you want, maybe Vlad will actually show up to your site and do some teaching himself. We promise that he will be in full light and not just a silhouette. Someone, Vlad, in the comments said you look like you're in witness protection, which I think is the funniest thing anyone has said on the show all year long. So top comment of the show this year so far. Hans, this has been amazing. We're going to go ask you the same questions we ask all of our guests. And as we have prepared you, first question we love to ask is to go predict the future. I mean, I'd love to know kind of your thought of the future of either controls or programming languages, or maybe which company you think is going to continue an upward trend in Europe and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I think that if you look at the moment at the posts and the content out there, it's quite clear that AI is very high on the list. So all the big players in automation market, Rockwell, Siemens, Beckhoff, there seems to be putting their money and their mouths on AI. So I think that's going to be big in the future. That's going to be big everywhere, not just industrial, but yeah, everyone have seen that steep climb of artificial intelligence. The only thing that I mean, personally, I still think for a PLC programmer to be AI to be really of use, I would like to see an AI that can actually take in standards, learn the standards, and then feed you code according to those standards. I think that is something that I could really use. The AI now that just writes you a couple codes of statement list, that's great, but I still have the feeling that a lot of manufacturers have their standards, and an AI doesn't write according to the standards of that specific machine builder. So I would like that to be seen added to platforms like Siemens and Rockwell, that you can feed them actually standards, and they have some machine learning into their AI as well.
I would also love that.
Because yeah,
yes, I would also. I was gonna say, Vlad, think about how many fewer hours a week you and I would have to discuss if the AI would just do all of the PLC programming for me. Absolutely, Hans. This has been amazing. Next question I'd like to ask you is for some career advice. I know you've got a really interesting career. I feel like we could talk for like 4 more hours, especially on that jump from when you decided that you wanted, that you told everyone that you were going to stop being an employee and go freelance, and then you moved entire countries like 3 months after doing that to be with your wife, which was obviously probably the best choice you could have made at that point.
It was the best choice. Yeah, exactly.
Despite how chaotic it was. But would love kind of your thought of someone earlier, mid-career. What's the best career advice that you can give for them?
Well, I got 3 points. I got a bit prepared here. I got 3 career advices. The first one is if you want to have a career as a PLC program, you should start by reaching out to machine builders or to companies that use PLC in their products. And I think one of the best ways, the biggest leaps you can make in programming is by traveling, by commissioning, by working with actual hardware, with actual machines. I mean, that's how I made the biggest jumps. Just being thrown in with the lions, so to speak, like just. It can be a bit tough. It sometimes separates the people who are made for it and the people who are not. But you come out really good on the other end if you push through. The second career advice I would have is to try as well to work for different companies. Not just one company, because if you work with one company, you see one standard of software and you think that's that's probably as good as it gets. If you start working with different companies over your career, you start seeing different standards and you start seeing the good and the bad kind of software, and you can your eyes are open to, you're just a little bit more open to what's out there in the world. I mean, I've seen some of my biggest leaps as well by just getting working with a new client that was very organized, looking at the software, and I was like, wow, okay, this is how you can do things as well. So I think that's the second piece of advice: work with different companies. And the last piece of advice, and I already mentioned it a little bit before, I think as a PLC programmer, if you want to stick out above the rest, don't focus so much on the language that you're doing, but try and find courses or try and find anything that's related to being organized. So trying to find out how to break down applications into smaller modules, maybe practice on your own, take a couple of example applications, real life applications, and try and see if you can build them up modular. I think that's one of the key skills for a PLC program to learn, and that will give you the best choices for your career. Yeah.
Absolutely. Vlad, do you have a comment there?
No, I think it's really good advice. Appreciate that.
No, I agree. I think it's fantastic advice. One of the topics that we really didn't jump into, Hans, was all of the work on the machine builder side. We talked about you doing that. I feel like at some point we'll have to bring you back to go talk about that. I feel like Vlad and I, a lot more of our experiences on the OEM and systems integrator side. And so to some extent, the machine builders don't get split out into their own kind of separate areas in there. And I think that would be an interesting conversation. But I would absolutely agree. I have done work with specific organizations in the past that my knowledge and understanding of things that they've done right or wrong, most of the time wrong in my experience, but things that they've done right or wrong have significantly helped me jump forward in my learnings and understandings. Whereas if you just spend your entire career in one place, you just know how that one place does that work. So
100%.
I would agree. That's fantastic advice. Next question we'd like to ask is for a book or content recommendation. I mean, I know you have a couple for us. Vlad has a bunch of flights ahead of him. So what can we do? What can he listen to fill his time?
I mean, I could just tell you the books that had a big impact on my way of thinking. So it's not so much PLC related, but the way that I approach life. One of them would be, and that's an old book, that's Unlimited Power from Tony Robbins. It's about neuro-linguistic programming, about training your brain to think different, and it's about achieving personal and professional success. And that book has had a big impact on how I see life and how I've seen my career. It's one of the main reasons that I took the jump to being a freelancer. So that would be the first book. The second book would be The 4-Hour Workweek, Tim Ferriss. It's one of these books that really stuck with me about creating a life that you design, not that someone else's designs for you. By just being the creator of your own life, just being in charge, and by trying to be really efficient with your hours, outsourcing things that you can outsource. So that's a book I would really recommend. And then finally, I have some YouTube content as well that I would like to share. I listened to a guy called Graham Cochran, which is an entrepreneur, a business coach, an author. He creates a lot of content, and he helps people to build successful online businesses. So it's not so much about the PLC programming, but as if you're ever thinking of maybe doing your own PLC training, or you want to start with a website, or want to see how you do all that, how you set up the marketing, how you get people on your email list, then that guy is the right guy. So he's called Graham Cochran. So you can just look for him on YouTube with his name, Graham Cochran. Yeah, and those are the three pieces of content that I would recommend. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that, Hans. For all of our listeners, we will make sure we get the books and the correct Graham Cochran email. I'm sorry, Graham Cochran YouTube account in order to go ahead and drop those in the comments. And those will also be in the show notes for all of our podcast, excuse me, afterward listeners. Hans, last question for you is, how can our listeners help? Who should reach out? Who's looking to connect? Can we go ahead and plug some of the online courses and other things that you're doing, please?
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, if you're just getting started with TIA Portal, or you're struggling with creating modular PLC applications, you like to organize your logic, create structured programs, then you can go and check out my TIA Portal training courses, which are available on my website. That's www.plcskilltree.com. I'm pretty sure Dave is going to put a link to that in the description below. And while you're there, you can go and grab my free guide, so you can get started with structuring and TIA Portal straight away. I made a free guide for you, which contains 5 simple steps in which you can drastically improve the structure of your PLC programs in TIA Portal. So go and download that free guide. You will get additional emails as well with lots of value. I think there's a 30-day email sequence. I'm going to be sharing blogs. I'm going to share more videos. So if you're into TIA Portal, into structuring PLC programs, then go and check that out. I have a YouTube channel as well where you can get free tutorials. You can check that out at youtube.com/@PLCskilltree. That's the handle, @PLCskilltree. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm quite busy on LinkedIn as well, whenever I find the time. So I do a lot of posting there. And you can just search for my name, Hans Schrynemakers, on LinkedIn. Follow me over there, connect with me. I typically answer all the questions. So if you write me something, I will always answer. I'm quite easygoing. So just write me, let me know you're there, and let's connect.
Absolutely. Hans, thank you so much. And everyone, thank you so much for hanging out with here. Hans, I will say that there are a couple other questions in the comments talking about programming structure and otherwise. I'll go ahead and tag you in those comments. I imagine that you have a much longer thought or series of thoughts to go ahead and share, which is another topic that we didn't get into, despite the fact that every time you say it, I absolutely love it. Can you imagine that? Structured PLC programs, Vlad. Vlad is shaking his head in the fact that he can imagine that when he sleeps, and only in his dreams sometimes. But no, Hans, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. Go check out PLC Skill Tree, which should be in the show notes, and it should also be in all of the chats that you guys are here listening and watching. Beyond that, go check out Solus PLC if you want to go see a full range of PLC courses. And then if you guys have made it this far, thank you so much. Make sure you're following Hans and connect with Hans. Make sure you're following Vlad and myself and Manufacturing Hub. We're here just about every Wednesday at 4 o'clock East Coast time, going and having these awesome conversations. We've had so many of you joining us for the first time. Again, thank you guys so much for doing that. If you made it this far on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button. That always helps all of our metrics. We've got like 24 of you guys watching on YouTube concurrently right now. So please go ahead and make sure to follow along on the Manufacturing Hub YouTube. And then beyond that, if you made it this far in podcast form, you are absolutely awesome. Please remember to do those things like and subscribe and rate us 5 stars and follow along so that you get new episodes. And Hans, as I like to joke every week, when I remember to tell people to follow along and Vlad remembers to go post the new episodes on Thursday mornings, we just have more subscribers and listeners. It's like either magic. It works just like magic. But until next week, we'll see everyone soon. Thank you.